customer advisory boards were a key topic we wanted to make sure we covered here, because especially during the COVID, and when I've been talking to my clients and helping them get through the impact of COVID, thinking back to where we were in March and April, this was one of the things that we were hearing was both, we want to double down overall on our existing customers and keep them closer to our company and closer to each other, but we also want to better engage both our power users, our power customers, and start capturing more of their feedback, especially on how we can help them. That's what the smart companies were doing. But then also, how can we help build those relationships further up the organization at our client sites, which will be the second session this afternoon, the third session of the day on executive engagement with Rob Levitt. But with that, let me turn it over to David. I think you're going to be the ringleader of the session on cabs. So I'm just going to turn it over to you and let you introduce the rest of your panel of experts, and really looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say about cabs.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Jeff, and it's great to be here. I am the leader of this merry band, and Jeff's totally right. I mean, this is an area where we call it small but mighty for a reason, because it seems like a good idea, and a lot of execs are like, hey, how about having an advisory board? But done badly, it can have really negative consequences. Done well, it definitely takes a lot of time and resource, but it's super valuable. So without further ado, what I want to do is briefly introduce the fellow panelists. What we're going to do is walk through a series of questions and kind of give feedback on those, and would love to have this be an interactive session. So Jeff, maybe if you can help us manage the chat. If there are people with questions as we go through this session, please feel free to ask, and we will answer in real time. So without further ado, maybe if I could ask Heather just to introduce herself, please.
Sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Heather Pritchett, and I'm the Director of Customer Voice for OutSystems. We're in the software space. We have a modern platform for application development, and wanted to just give a little bit of background on my cab experience. I had a little bit previously in a previous life years ago, but one of the first programs that we actually put together when we started customer advocacy about roughly 4 years ago was a customer advisory board as one of our top priorities. So I had the exciting opportunity and challenge to build that from scratch. And again, started in 2016 in the Americas region, and have since expanded to EMEA in 17, APAC in 18, and now we've got these boards running simultaneously a couple of times per year.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Heather. Jeannie?
You're on mute.
I'm on mute. Thanks, Heather. I'm Jeannie Talbot. I'm Director of Customer Marketing for CloudBees. We are in the software space as well, in the CI/CD space. I have been managing our Customer Advisory Board for about 3 years, have taken that from a pretty much a one-time-a-year boondoggle trip to more of a strategic initiative where the CAB members are really integrated into our executive team and our product management team for really true mutual value. And it's been probably one of the biggest highlights of my role at CloudBees, is really building that CAB into a very strategic part of our business, but also making sure that the feedback that's coming back into the business is really valuable and leveraged. I will say that the one big thing that's different about my CAB is that it's enormous. Mm-hmm. It's extremely large. It's 100 customers. It's 100 people, which is very unusual. And we've done that by design, and I'll talk about that in a little bit.
Thanks, Jeannie. And listen, I know we've got a number of folks on the call who maybe are interested in starting an advisory board or coming to advisory boards for the first time, and are like, holy crap, 100 people. So just know that Jeannie is an outlier out there. Typically, most advisory boards are between 12 and 15 members, and maybe you have a regional advisory boards. But Jeannie, you've put advisory boards on steroids. So looking forward to hearing a little bit more about that. And over to Yvette.
Hi, I'm Yvette. I'm the Director of Customer Evangelism at MongoDB. I've been here about a year. Before that, in my previous role, I was the Director of Customer Marketing at Riverbed, where I managed our Global Customer Advisory Board program, where we had one VP Plus annual CAB, and 3 technical advisory councils that were director level and below in the major regions. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the chat.
Perfect. Welcome. And I stand corrected, 2 overachievers, right, with multiple boards. So Yvette, thank you for the introduction. And I'm David Coates. I'm Director of Customer Marketing over at Forta. I've been with them about 18 months. My advisory board experience goes back about 8 years now. I built Iron Mountain's advisory board, which was financial services. I ran that for a number of years, and now working at Forta, which is a fraud prevention company, on helping them really hone their customer advisory board too. Cool. All right. Well, so without further ado, I wanted to get into the first topic, and sorry if I can progress the slides. So, you know, it goes without saying, I think anytime we've done customer work right now, in the last few months, I mean, COVID has always been part of the conversation. And as Jeff said at the top of the call, you know, clearly COVID changed a lot within the world of customer advisory boards, which, you know, fundamentally, the real art of a customer advisory board is getting folks together, getting them out the office environment, being able to spend time with them, not only in a professional capacity, but also to get to know them personally. And suddenly come March, everyone's world was turned upside down. And that was definitely true with COVID. So I'm going to start with Heather, if I can. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how you adjusted, what you did to try and make sure that you maintained the value of the advisory board during this difficult time?
Yes. So one of the things that we did was really spend more time up front talking to the members individually, socializing some ideas on how we might take what would normally be, you know, a 7 or 8 hour day in person and translate that into, you know, a virtual environment. So 2 things I think worked well were being able to socialize that and get their feedback. At that point, we were kicking these off in May and June. So people were just getting into that flow of virtual meetings, and it seemed to be following the flow of what they had been seeing with, you know, other things that they were doing. The second thing that we decided to do was actually not recruit any new members, even though that was the plan for this year. We asked for roughly a 2-year commitment to being part of we call it the council, we call it the advisory council. So if I say council, that's why. But to be part of that, we asked for about 2 years, and there were a number of people that we had planned to refresh because we like to get fresh perspectives in. But we decided in a virtual environment for the first time, we thought it would make have a better opportunity for engagement and cohesiveness because the group had already known each other. So instead of having half the group or 75% of the group being brand new, trying to talk to each other and engage, we decided to keep recruiting to a minimum. So we had a couple of open seats that we brought some new people in, and it actually flowed quite well for the engagement. And then of course we had to figure out how to manage the appreciation and the wow factor that we would normally have. And it's a very simple thing, so I'll just throw it out there, but they absolutely loved it. We actually had a sketch artist. So we had someone come in. I don't know if you've seen those in real life conferences, but they came in and actually live sketched the meeting. So we could check in as the meeting was going on. And then we gave it to the members as a takeaway, and everybody, it was just a huge hit. So those were the things that we did to try to make it a little bit different coming into this virtual model. And, you know, we're continuing that in a little bit different way as well.
So I love the idea of doing like the sketch artist, I mean, because that's something that translates really well to being virtual and it's still personal. So that's a really great example. It's interesting because I'm going to bring Jeannie in now because, you know, you kind of focused in on like keeping the core cab without adding new members. I think, Jeannie, you took a little bit of a different tack, and certainly I did as well. And we can talk about that in a second. But Jeannie, do you want to talk about what you did?
Sure. Thanks. We actually added some members for 2 reasons. One is we wanted to shape some of the diversity of the cab. We were heavily male North America financial services. And so even in the midst of COVID, we really tried to shift those metrics to really round out the voices in the cab. We also shifted to a theme around conversations with the cab. Typically our meetings were somewhat agenda based, where we had a topic or a theme or something that we wanted to really dig in on, either that we brought forward or that members brought forward. But we opened up our cab meetings in the last several months to be more conversational. So we brought a topic forward. One of them was the impact of COVID. And the members really liked that because it was giving them that interaction with each other, because they want to talk to each other, not just to us. And that really resonated well. And we've continued it now with with additional topics and having it be much more freeform. We have about 30 people-ish of the 100 that come to, and it rotates, if you will. People come to some and not others, other meetings, but it's worked really well, and had our CEO facilitate those.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, Jeannie, we took a similar tack to you, right? Because traditionally, and you talked about the different like segmentation of advisory boards, where you have a VP plus and more like almost like a products focused advisory board. On our advisory board originally, we had tried to focus more on kind of that VP level customer. The challenge a little bit was we really serve merchants and retailers who, you know, come March, the whole world turned upside down, right? I mean, brick and mortars closed down. Nobody's quite sure of what the future of online shopping would look like. And so we decided was we wanted to open up, and we called it our cab exchange, right? So we actually differentiated a little bit from being the executive advisory board to your point, Jeannie, more of an open forum for initially our members and other folks within the customer base to come together and just to talk about what was going on. I mean, it was at some points almost like a day-to-day occurrence, and not the advisory board, but the changes in the market. And so we moved to like a monthly connect and exchange. And we pretty much had some of our executives available, and it was more of that almost like clinic environment where members could come in, they could ask questions of what we're seeing in our data. They could also ask questions of other folks. And it was kind of interesting because we had everything from online travel agencies, like Priceline, through to large retailers like Nordstrom, participating, right? And the effect was very different. Even though traffic had gone down a lot across, the effect was very different. So we're now trying to figure out a little bit, right, as we look into 2021, and we're hopeful, knock on wood, that we can do an executive level advisory board in person. What do we do with a cab exchange, right? Because we're getting some really great engagement, and maybe they're not quite the right level to come into the executive advisory board, but, you know, how do we potentially keep that going in some form so that we can recognize not only the participation, but there's a couple of folks in there that, when we'll talk about this later, that have really great stories to tell, and might not be from our biggest customers, but super passionate, super motivated, and they want to get their story told publicly in lots of different ways. So it's going to be interesting moving forward. I also wanted to ask a question around not only, you know, the form of the advisory board, but what did you see in terms of engagement, right? Because people are getting to the point of being zoomed out with meetings. You know, it's often tricky because they're trying to manage so many different deadlines. I'm go back to Jeannie first. What have you seen in terms of like engagement levels and stuff with folks in this time?
It's been about the same, but it's been different people, which is kind of interesting. Some of our, you know, traditional folks that have always been at every single meeting weren't, and then some that were kind of outliers that popped in and popped out have now been the more consistent ones. I have noticed that travel and hospitality, those industries have been hardest hit. Those have just dropped off. They haven't come to the most recent CAB meetings.
Great. And Heather?
Yeah, from what we saw is the attendance was probably pretty similar to an in-person meeting. What was interesting is there was more engagement. I mean, people were pretty engaged in talking and sharing their opinions, but what we got, and not surprisingly, was the multitaskers, or the, oh my gosh, I just got pulled into another call, I'm gonna miss, because we broke ours into different slots of sessions with breaks in between. And it worked well because people needed those breaks. They can't sit on Zoom forever, but it was oh, I've got this fire, or no, I'm gonna miss the session. So it was less cohesive than it normally is of having people in a room and focused. So it was kind of a mixed bag for us.
Yeah. Great. And I know we've got a couple of questions, and I don't want anybody to think that I'm ignoring Yvette right now, but Yvette doesn't run the MongoDB advisory board right now, but I don't know if you've got any insights from that team, Yvette, as to kind of what changed with your team over there.
Yeah, I have a couple things that I've seen happen, which is interesting, where the need for feedback has kind of increased, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like where I traditionally I would lean on the CAB, I see voice of the customer programs popping up in our customer success team. Our design team has created a 1,000-member board of like getting constant feedback, which to me, like you talk about overachieving, 1,000 is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And there's been like champion programs kind of turning up in our developer advocacy team to get that feedback. So I think instead of depending on the one source, one board to help inform business decisions, it seems like the need is greater, and they've sort of been spreading out where they're getting that input, which I think has been really fascinating to watch.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you, Yvette. Now, Jeff, I saw there's some questions in chat. Was there anything that people wanted to share before we move on? I don't know if Jeff's on the line.
Yeah. So here's one from Rebecca. For companies without a CAB, how do you know when you are ready to start one? When is it too early?
I don't think it's ever too early.
Yeah, but what I will say, Jeannie, and that's a great question, and that's something we definitely encountered when I mounted. I think what's really important, though, and Jeannie, I don't know if you agree, is that it can't be a bottom-up initiative. Right, it works best, I think, when there's a meeting of the minds and you've got some of your big customers who are like, hey, we would love to be able to contribute more in a more formal way. And you've got some of your executives, and it's even better if you've got an executive sponsor who says, yes, actually, this is really important, and I'm willing to put my name against this because I think it's going to have benefit for us building relationships with our customers, and also benefit with internally in driving either my agenda or our agenda. I think one of the biggest areas that advisory boards fail is that there's no clear senior level executive support and agenda, and it's something that the marketing team says, hey, we need an advisory board, and then the effort's put to put it in place, but you can't get that alignment. So Gina, I don't know if you have any other thoughts.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I do think start small,
Yeah.
Of course I'm contradicting myself, but starting small I think is a good first step. And also ask your customers, to kind of test that out. Would a CAB, be valuable to you? And here's what that might look like. And would customers really engage?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say too, just one additional thing to kind of drive in what David was saying is, if your executives, the people that run the departments and programs that you will get feedback on, if they're not bought in and willing to do something with the feedback that you're getting, then there's not much point, right? Because if you get feedback from the customers and you never consider it or do anything with it, there's no value back to the members.
And Kate asks a question, which is one that I was going to ask myself, and because I've experienced this too. What do you do when the CAB is being controlled by the CEO and it's really just a boondoggle, and nobody else in the company ever even knows that these meetings are going on, or getting any benefit from it? I mean, what do you do? And like Jeannie, you mentioned that yours was a boondoggle 3 years ago. How did you turn it into something productive?
We created a sort of a CAB planning committee, an internal group that includes not only marketing, but product marketing and product management. And so with that group, we've been able to sort of socialize that team, have a process that starts, with the planning of the meeting, but then goes all the way through to sort of reporting out. The piece that I think we need to do a better job on, that I highlight to the group, is the linkage back into the sales organization. I think we haven't necessarily done a great job of connecting the dots for sales, so that they know that the feedback that came from their customers in the CAB back to them. So I think that's one place, but there is that feel of the CAB that it's secret, that it's only for certain people. But you're right. I think to be able to have that access, that transparency is really, really critical.
I'm just going to make one more point, Jeff, and then I'm going to move on because we've got some really good content to cover. So the other thing I would say, right, is at the end of the day, everybody knows their budgets are under scrutiny. Maybe the CEO's got more leeway to go and spend $70,000, $80,000 on a meeting. But I also think it comes down to kind of how do you best utilize your budget? And if the CEO is committed to spending that money, that's great. But there's so much more that you can do with that value than just saying, hey, wouldn't it be great to schmooze a bunch of customers, you know, in Puerto Rico or somewhere, right? And it's not, and the other part of it as well, what I found, and it can depend on which verticals you're supporting. Increasingly, customers are also looking for value because they have to go through their own compliance checks often. They have to get legal sign off to be part of the board, especially as resource gets tighter. So I think it's also really important if you want to attract the right customers to participate, that there's clear value for them, that it's not just a 2-day golfing exercise in Arizona or something, right? And so, you know, I think there's ways that you can position it around budget and around value for members and their compliance that could also help potentially negate a CEO's perspective, but it is tricky. Cool. And then I forgot to mention at the top, for each question, what we've done is we've just kind of highlighted some key themes and takeaways for each. So, you know, I think we covered like pivoting to virtual meeting. Obviously that was for everyone, and Heather didn't extend, Jeannie and I did extend. Also focus on that trust, right? I mean, at the end of the day, one of the beauties of working in customer marketing is that we get to work with people and understand their challenges, but that's a basic trusted relationship. So it's really about listening and kind of engaging and bringing other folks in. And then the final thing is, and I think Heather provided a great example, change it up, right? So maybe invite external subject matter experts, or have a session where the CEO comes in, or have an artist come and do caricatures. I mean, those are great examples of, I think, how we've had to change up in the last few months. So next topic, and it's one that came up in the surveys quite a lot actually, was, okay, that's great. So how do you actually get started, right? What are the critical elements to creating internal alignment? We kind of started to talk about this already, right? It can't be just one executive's hobby horse or favorite project, right? It has to be something that gains alignment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Yvette. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of how you can drive that internal alignment?
Yeah, I think, you know, running a cab is a lot of responsibility. It can have a lot of impact on the business that they might tell you about, they might not tell you about. So I think you really want to understand the business and who's making the business decisions and what input they need while you when you get started. I think that's critical to making sure that people actually need the feedback. Like Heather was saying earlier, if they don't want the feedback, they're not going to implement it, then your cab won't be really successful. I think getting that understanding of the landscape of the executive team really helps a lot, because it'll become a critical, it can become a critical component of big business decision-making areas.
Perfect, thank you. Heather.
Yeah, I was just sitting here thinking, you know, I've been pretty lucky in my position because actually our CMO was the one that was the executive sponsor for putting this together, and so had already gotten buy-in from our SMT. So the part of getting the buy-in was not such a problem. What I've had to do, especially as executives change roles, new people come and go over the past 4 years, is keeping everyone aligned. And one of the things that's helped the most, I think, is just being very clear, you know, about the goals and objectives for both us as a company, the members and what they get out of it. And again, showing the, you know, historically the value that we've been getting, the inputs, the improvements that we've made as a business based on the feedback has been helpful for keeping everyone aligned. And so we've even improved that going into this year to create, I think somebody else has mentioned, you know, like a kind of a steering committee, but, you know, going directly to the top and say, what are the major questions we need answered from these members? What things do we have going on as a business right now? And then starting to filter down to their teams to start putting the topics and, you know, the actual content together.
That's great. Thank you, Heather. And Jeannie, obviously, you have boards that serve multiple different purposes, right, by product line as well. So I'm assuming a lot of your work initially was kind of really corralling everyone and making sure that everyone was aligned internally, right, around the purpose of the advisory board. I'd be interested in you sharing a little bit more about what you did there.
Something, you know, a a value add that David, I stole from you and that you mentored me on was establishing a CAB charter. And I think we're going to talk about this later, but that actually, even though I built it initially thinking it was going to be for the CAB members, it was magic internally for creating alignment with our internal folks around this is what the CAB is. This is who we need and want on the CAB. This is the process, the value that they're getting, the value that we're getting. So that was really, it put a stake in the ground, as Heather said, to really be clear on what the objectives are. The second thing I'll say is that our company uses Slack a lot. So we have a CAB planning Slack channel that anybody can join if they want to see what's going on with the CAB. And when our next meetings are. I'm building now a Confluence page to do the same thing, to have that transparency internally.
I'm going to come back to the charter in a second, but I'm interested in that Slack channel. Do you have a Slack channel that's all, because our customers use Slack to engage with our CSMs, our analysts, and we have just started to use Slack with customers. Do you use Slack with your customers?
We have a Slack advisory board, external Slack channel. I will say that it's one way. It's me pushing to them. They can engage, but they haven't. And we're not quite sure why. We've also seen that there are certain industries and particular accounts that cannot be on external Slack channels. So there's this group of members that are excluded from that. So I'm still relying heavily on email for the CAB members.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just want to come back to the point, Jeannie, around charters, because yeah, it was something that we initiated at Iron Mountain, and it was hugely helpful, because what it does is, before you even get to the point of really building out and recruiting members, what it does is a forcing function to make sure that the executives are aligned, not only in what the purpose is, but also that their commitment that, look, this is something that we are documenting, that we want to deliver value for the organization, that we want to deliver value for our customers. And so I think that is a great point to get people aligned around internally. The other thing I would say about charters, which are really valuable, is, again, I'm going to come back to the members. We know from when we recruited for our first advisory board that having that charter and it looking like a real asset, right? I mean, we had it branded and everything. That really helped our members get internal sign-off that this was something that was tangible, that the compliance team could review it again, legal could review it again, and see, okay, this isn't just a boondoggle where you're going to go away for 2 days and be out of work, right? Effectively, you will go network with peers, you'll go and bring value back to the organization. And so setting that expectation, both internal and externally through the charter, was hugely, hugely helpful. Cool. And so I'm going back to the audience now. Any questions, Jeff, that have come in terms of getting internal alignment? I can tell you that from the survey that was fielded just before this conference, there were like a lot of people who said that this was one of the biggest challenges. So definitely happy to answer any questions here.
I can add one thing, David. Yeah. When you're talking about internal alignment, I found that sometimes I needed executives to participate that like they were very busy and like couldn't really see the value beyond like the charter and the briefing guide and all the things I put together. But when I started putting the money together and I said, okay, I've added up all the customers who are attending, this is how much money they've spent, and this is how much money is in the pipeline, suddenly everybody's on board, because it's a lot of money and it can have a big impact. So if when you're talking about internal alignment, if you're trying to get stakeholders excited about being there, that can be one really effective way.
That's fantastic. And you're right. As soon as you start putting budget, and it doesn't need to be just dollars. What I also did, and I think this is where you're going to, is that it also is resource. And what I tried to do is, as part of my project in calculating kind of what the investment was, not only just put the dollar value, right, which is the event itself, but also potentially how much time commitment we would need from different parts of the organization as well. And I think that was really helpful in saying, getting department heads to say, okay, yes, I can afford to have a person commit 10% or 15% of their time to this, you know.
I've also got every 2 weeks, we have a CAB planning meeting for that small cohort of people. It's always on the calendar. We don't always have that meeting, but it's there, it's locked. And so every 2 weeks, we can start to decide and make decisions for what what's happening with the CAB, how things are changing, what the priorities are for the next meeting that's coming.
Perfect. And I just was checking in the chat. So thank you, Jeannie, for volunteering to share your charter. I'll see if I can dig up out my old.
I have yours.
Oh, well, hell.
You taught me.
Yeah, feel free to share. So thank you, Jeannie. So just kind of reviewing. So we're happy to share that and keep your questions coming. These are great. In terms of kind of the key summary here, obviously we talked about make sure you're documenting where the charter is clear, ensure that your subject matter execs understand what's needed. Also, make sure that you're interviewing key stakeholders on a semi-regular basis. So it could be every 6 months. It's just a check-in with the members, how things going, how you feel, relaying that back internally, also doing the same with internal execs as well. And then to Heather's point earlier, it's also focusing on the business, right? It's helping your execs understand what's in it for them. How will it help advise their agenda, their roadmaps, their strategy? And also, sometimes the value is in being able to say no. As a head of or lead of a customer advisory board, it puts you in a unique position where you are engaging with your senior executives on a regular basis. You are engaging with senior customers on a regular basis. And sometimes as a customer marketer, it's easy to kind of put yourself into the background a little bit. But I do think that you have a role within the organization as a trusted advisor. And that is important as much to say no as sometimes say yes. Cool. All right, on to the next topic. And next what we want to cover was one of the areas that Heather touched on, which always comes up, right? The company is making this big investment. It's putting forward budget. It's flying people to meetings when they come back online, hopefully. It's also making sure that resources are available internally. So how do you show value? And that's not just for your organization, but also for the members. And I'm going to go to Yvette here.
It's funny when we were talking about showing value after the CAB, you have the thing that was highest rated every single time when we did a post-CAB, a post-CAB survey, both to internal people and to the customers themselves, was networking. It was all of the things that you can't have during this time, right? Like the dinners, the chats over drinks, the time between breakout sessions, and all that stuff was like highly rated because that one-on-one passive time really was where people got the most input they needed, or be able to, if they came with an agenda, really make sure that their agenda points were made. But when I think about value beyond the CAB, I was thinking about what you did, David, with the content you created from the CAB, which was like pretty genius. I think that's one of the best ways that it sort of turned from input into sort of helping the marketing engine in ways directly, not the indirect stuff, right? With trajectory of the company, feedback on product, messaging, all the kind of the direct stuff from the CAB, but directly helping the marketing engine with lead gen and stuff like that was, I think, pretty fascinating.
Thanks, Yvette. And let me just explain to the audience here. So when we founded the advisory board at Iron Mountain, one of the things we focused on was at every annual meeting, we would end up highlighting 2 or 3 macro industry issues. And what we tried to focus on is topics that members couldn't solve on their own, right? That they needed support from other folks, but there were common problems. And then what we actually did was, in between the annual meetings, we actually set up working committees or steering committees, which were chaired by Iron Mountain folks, and were broken out by interest from the members. So they would select which topics they wanted to cover. And so obviously Iron Mountain was in records management, so it's information governance and those types of topics. And then we would spend 6 months or so actually working with that steering committee to create a guide, a how-to guide effectively, that would be produced at the end. And to Yvette's point, it wasn't just for the members, right? It was actually something that the members could then take internally, showcase their thought leadership, and that we could also co-brand with them and share publicly as a piece of thought leadership that advanced Iron Mountain's position in the marketplace as well, and had credibility because it was founded not just on Iron Mountain's views, but on these very large financial institutions. So we use that for demand and all sorts of stuff, but that does take time. That's not something you can do off the side of a desk. That takes real commitment, but thank you. That is a great example of it.
but it's kind of one of the dreams of everybody. Once you get all the executives in a room with all of the top customers that are great titles, everybody's like, how can we make these people into advocates for the company? And I think you did that in like the most seamless way I've seen anybody do it. Because obviously you build friendships, you become, you know, colleagues and peers with each other and customers among each other. So asking for thought leadership asking for them to participate in thought leadership after the event is a no-brainer, but you really did a way of formulating it into part of the meeting, which I thought was great.
Thank you.
That's genius.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. Thanks. You know, for a small consulting fee, I'm sure I can come and help you, Jeannie, as well. I'm joking. Jeannie, any other thoughts there as well?
Yeah, I'd add three things. One is access, you know, access to your executive team, direct access to your product management team. The second I would say is thought leadership, which I think we've all mentioned, but access to thought leadership opportunities that we can bring to them for external visibility, especially in COVID. A lot in the time of COVID, people are wondering and thinking about, gosh, am I going to have to look for my next gig?
Yes.
You know, so that's I think amplified opportunity now. And then the last thing, kind of funny, but swag, cool, unique swag for the cab members. It can't be understated, really.
And I'm going to go to I'm going to go to Heather in a second, but I want to come back to something you just said, Jeannie, which is super important. That we live in a super dynamic society and a super dynamic workforce. And I think, you know, for anybody who can get the opportunity to be involved in something like an advisory board or user groups and stuff, right? It's also an ultimate networking opportunity where, you know, I can tell you that we've had members who have moved organizations within the advisory board. We've also had a couple of members who came and joined Iron Mountain as employees.
Yes. Yes.
So to that point, there's also that human element, right, where it is about career advancement. It's about being able to network with people who are not only potentially peers, but also potential to be actually employers or employees as well. So that's something that you don't necessarily want to put in the charter clearly, like find your next job. But I do think that that's huge for members, is that networking. Heather, anything else to add?
Yeah, I would say one additional thing, it's really about the agenda development, like what Yvette was saying, that she knows that networking is huge value for the members, and that's one of the two biggest pieces for our members as well. So it's the networking, but also the ability to influence and access, like Jeannie was saying. So we try to make sure that when we're building the agenda, whether it's in person or now virtual, that we build that with our objectives in mind and their objectives in mind. And usually they're going to be crossing over in most of those cases, because we want to hear from them and hear what they're doing, and they want to hear from each other, and all of that comes out in those conversations. So that is huge. And I think the other thing that keeps our members coming back beyond just learning and networking with each other and being able to have influence is to see that their influence makes a difference. Yes. So we've made a big effort, and we're trying to get better and better at this, is not just communicating at the next meeting, you know, what has changed and updates on, hey, these are the things we discussed at the last meeting, this is what's evolved or progressed, and trying to do more in between. But for example, we changed a complete licensing model based on feedback, and now they see that, and it was a top concern, and we have our fall meetings in the next 2 weeks, and we decided to shrink them down in the amount of time that we're meeting with them, but really just focus on, hey, we heard in the spring these are your 2 biggest issues, we're going to do some workshops on those and bring in the right people and really spend some time. So to me, I think it's always demonstrating back what you're doing based on their feedback.
Yeah, I think that's hugely important, right? And I think that's one of the ways that advisory boards live or die is, you know, people are happy to go on a boondoggle sometimes and go and spend a couple of days, but what they really want to do, and the reason why they're signing up to do this, is to really have an impact, right? And that more that you can demonstrate that the organization is not only listening, but taking action through licensing agreements or through updating product roadmaps or feature functionality, depending on the level of the advisory board. I think that's all really tied to showing that impact and value.
Yes.
The other thing that I wanted to talk about just for a moment before I move on here is, as a customer marketer, one of the areas that I'm focused on is really trying to understand behaviorally what is motivating our customers? And I think one of the ways of trying to look at it is almost distill it down simplistically into 3 areas, right? If you think, we talked about one already, but if you think about people fundamentally looking how to show value internally so that they can move up in their organization, they're also potentially looking for the next opportunity. We talked about that just now, that the market is very, very dynamic in terms of job situation. So people are looking to move out potentially. And then the third thing is there are a lot of folks who really do like to be seen as being a thought leader. They work very hard on building their presence on LinkedIn. They go and speak at conferences and trade shows and stuff. And they want to be seen amongst their peers in the industry as being a thought leader. So that's that shout out. So I think if you can understand your members in terms of, are they looking to move up? Are they looking to move out? Are they looking to shout out effectively? That also helps you understand how do you reflect impact for them. And one of the areas I think that ties nicely into is then how do you mobilize them for acts of advocacy? And that can be everything from webinars and speaking opportunities at industry conferences, which you can tie back into the demand engine, right, for driving leads and MQLs and everything. Or it might be press releases and case studies, which again are good for sales, but also really positioning the organization within the industry around key messages and competition as well. So I think that understanding customer motivation is really important too.
I completely agree with you. We were really surprised. We thought it was a favor, right, for the customers to come to the advisory board and give feedback. But then, like you're saying, we started seeing people put it on their resumes and adding it to their LinkedIn profile as a key activity in their career. And that mind shift for us really made a big difference of realizing that like it wasn't a favor that we're asking customers, but we're providing them with a nice career opportunity.
Exactly.
We created a little badge for our members. Not many of them are using it, but I think it kind of gave them something like, wow, I'm in a group, you know, I'm in this, you know, cohort of VIPs like me.
I love that. I think that's great. And that also, and we haven't talked about it in the questions that we've outlined today, because we've only got 20 minutes left and there's a million things we could talk about, right? But one of the things that's really valuable, I think, is also when you have your user conference or customer conferences, being able to showcase your advisory board members, and it could be a badge, it could be a special lanyard, it could be special tables at the conference opening, it could be, there's lots of ways you can recognize the advisory board, but even amongst your customer base, I think there's a way to position it so that they're treated special, and then it's something else for potentially customers who are interested to aspire to as well, right? So the badging and all that kind of stuff is part of a visual way to do that. Cool. We did have a question from the audience. It was around the ideal size. And again, you know, there's not one size fits all, but what I was taught when I first built my advisory board was ideal size is between 12 and 15 members. And the reason for that number is twofold, right? You want it big enough so that if you do have some level of attrition, that people can't travel or they can't come to meetings, you're certainly not left with 2 or 3 folks in the room. But what you want to be careful of is you want to provide an environment where members feel that they can share and that they can, if you know it's in a 2-day meeting, that there's not 40, 50 people in a room where it's hard for them to feel like the voice can be heard. So we've traditionally gone 12 to 15. Jeannie, I know that you have 100, but you don't have 100 people in the room all at one time for the whole 3 days, right? You break it up as well.
I'll tell you that the size problem we've had is too many of us wanting to be in those meetings, right? So that it has to be balanced. You can't have the same number of execs or product management folks in the meeting as customers. The balance needs to be less of us and more of them, but enough people listening to ensure you've captured all the learnings.
Exactly. Perfect. Okay, so we've got 2 more areas to cover. So we've talked about COVID. We've talked about kind of how do you get started and aligned. We've covered mutual value. And then the next thing is you've launched this rocket ship up through the Earth's gravitational pull and you've got it into space. How do you keep it there, right? So I think a big question often comes down to, like, how do you maintain and sustain the advisory board? And this was one of the areas, again, as we got feedback from folks who were participating in the conference, this is one of the top 2 or 3 things that they were interested in. So Heather, can you talk a little bit about kind of what you're doing to sustain the advisory board?
Yeah, and I will say this is still an area that we're working to do a better job around, because sometimes in between meetings you just get caught back up into other programs and things that you're doing. But especially the past year, we've been working to provide more updates along the way about progress on actions. But one of the things that we also do is work to make sure that if there's any major company announcement, that we would give them advance notice. So, hey, this is going to be coming out. So that's one thing that we do. We also send them like surveys, for example, hey, we're about to launch this, or these new programs are coming out. What do you think? So I wouldn't say it's like a perfect cadence, but we try to make sure that the 4 or 5 months between the meeting, we're reaching out with something to give them some additional value, or to get their opinion on something that has popped up along the way.
That's great. Yvette?
So I think that it really comes down to the level of the cab. So when I was at Riverbed, we had the VP plus cab, and then we had the director level below technical advisory councils. We surveyed them because there was a big push, from the executives to want to hang out more. The VP plus crowd really only wanted to hang out one annually in person. The director level below, they wanted annual updates. So we started doing virtual, biannual updates. So we started doing virtual at the 6-month mark, and then in person, 6 months later. But I think it depends on what the level within the what the title is of your person and how busy they are. Some VP pluses, they book out 2 months in advance, and there's no way you're going to get them more than just that in-person time. But that's kind of what we found.
Yeah, that's great. I would agree. I think it does depend a little bit on level. I think also it depends on what you're asking them to participate in as well, right? So originally we thought we maybe do a cadence of one interim meeting every 3 months between the annual meetings, so like 4. But what we found when we started to build the guides is that the members like, look, we're really committed to this. Once a quarter isn't enough. So we actually moved to once a month, and with little working sessions in between, right? So it can be driven a little bit by the project that you've got the members working on in between. And then also, to be honest, the other thing as well is you're going to have some members who are super passionate. So I think the other thing to think about contextually is it doesn't always have to be the host company that is constantly forcing the agenda. And if you've got some folks who are passionate, there's also opportunities for them to, we had members who would ask questions in between. Hey, who's doing this? Or can I just get a quick poll on this, right? Or can I organize a call? We actually had members who were based in New York, 3 or 4. So organically, they were like, hey, we want to get our teams together to be able to go and talk about some of these challenges. So they had the whole records management team come to the offices of another member and spend half a day together going through compliance issues and governance as well. So I think there's ways that you can do it that's not always about you trying to force or drive the agenda. Jeannie, what do you think?
Those thought leadership opportunities have been, I think, the best way that we've kept momentum. Unfortunately, I think where we need to do better is the product management engagement in between our meetings. We have them quarterly is our typical cadence, but also we've done some of the things that Heather and Yvette have talked about. But for me, I think bringing those thought leadership opportunities forward has been one of the best ways for us to keep some momentum and engagement. That's
great. And one final point, I just on the slide here, and forgive me, I forgot to upload the most recent version, so that last section is a little wrong. But the other thing I would say as well, and it comes back to something that mentioned earlier, is we also found ways to be able to help the members show impact within their organizations. And that was really important in terms of maintaining, sustaining the board, because the more that they could go back and say, hey, we're actually learning and this helps us. And in fact, they use some of the documentation as part of their best practices documentation within their organization as well, and would ask for, hey, we produce this report. Are you guys going to produce a PowerPoint presentation to go with it? Because we need to present to our management board on what we've learned. That is great because that sustains their interest from the member side. The other thing it does as well, and this is the subtle art of chemistry on this stuff, is you start to find that the members are very protective of the body. So bringing in new members is tricky, right? Because it's not just about the qualifications. it's also about how will this person be a good chemistry fit. And we had some members who were similar to Heather. We originally had a 2-year agreement as part of the charter. We ended up with some members who were on the board for 5 years because they really enjoyed it. But they'll also be very protective of like, hey, we want to make sure this remains collegial. We want to make sure that if people join the board, that they understand that their commitment to the broader group, and that they're also willing to come in a spirit of openness and sharing without compromising anything to do with, you know, the IP or anything else that would be considered under the like strategic, right? So that was really important as well in terms of sustaining the value and the culture of the advisory board too.
Yeah, people, when you get your largest customers in a room, they've spent a lot of money, you know, on your company. Their budgets, they put a lot of money from their budget into your company. And so we found that customers showed up with their whole team's wish list of all the things they wanted to talk about. And it became a real value add for that company to say, okay, this is our strategic partner. This is not like a tech vendor. This is our strategic partner. We meet with them all the time. We're really close with all these project managers. And we found that that really close relationship really did become a partnership, and the value that customers found out of it was a complete two-way street, like you're saying, David. It's really magical when it's done right.
Yeah, and it takes work, right? I mean, the thing about the advisory board is, you know, it's 10% inspiration, 90% perspiration, you know, so, you know, it's going to be somebody's idea, but it's got to be somebody's baby at the end of the day. So question from Kimberly, which I think is great, which is, do you have your board members sign NDAs? So Jeannie, do you want to weigh in there?
So most of our enterprise accounts, we have an existing non-disclosure agreement as part of the contract process. But for those that we may have gone through a partner or that don't have NDAs in place, I team up with our legal team to make sure that those T's and C's are taken care of. And we do say at every meeting, we remind our members, and it's on all of our presentations or slides or any other communication, that the information is all confidential. We have not had any issues with our CAB members. I think they respect that incredibly. I mean, it's almost unnecessary to say it because it's a given, but we say it anyway.
And Heather, similar for you?
Yeah, we've not had any issues either. I mean, we just, like Jeannie, everything is, this is confidential. And we even tell the members, like when we share the follow-ups after like the roadmap, for example, like this is not even for your team's eyes. This is for yours. So we're just trying to be very explicit, but no issues with us.
Yeah, I'm going to move on to the last topic of the day, but I would agree 100% with what Heather and Jeannie both said. Because at the end of the day, when you build that level of trust between your executive team and the board members, that allows you to go maybe further than you would even with industry analysts or anybody else, right? Where you can maybe show stuff that is in development on the product roadmap, or that the executive team is thinking about, hey, we think this is a new market for us. What do you guys think? And that's very material to the long-term success of the organization. So having those NDAs in place, either contractually or for the advisory board, is really important. The other thing I would say as well, and it comes up quite a lot, especially for financial institutions, is, hey, are your meetings recorded, right? If you're doing a virtual session, or if you're doing the live session, what are we doing? And so what I've done traditionally is use the Chatham House rules, which goes back about 100 years. And fundamentally, the idea is that you can record, write down people's feedback responses, but it's never attributed. So that's also kind of one of the ways to help ensure that the meeting flows, that people feel they can share in a safe environment, but that, you know, you're still honoring the NDA and the relationship you have with the customer.
I can add to that, David. One thing that we saw organically happen, which was interesting, was the NDA became not enough for some of our members, and we actually had to develop a mutual NDA saying that members that were in the room knew that everybody was under NDA, but they also would not share any information that other members shared, because it became such an open environment. Customers wanted to make sure they were protected also, which was fascinating.
Yeah, really. Exactly. I can see that. Go ahead, Heather. Jeannie, sorry.
No, I was saying that's amazing. That's real commitment, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the NDA wasn't enough. We needed a mutual NDA. So the legal team drew up a special one, and all the members had to sign it, whether or not we had an NDA in place or not.
So we're on to our final topic, and I just want to cover this like maybe in like 3 or 4 minutes. We'll have a couple minutes at the end of the hour for questions. But this is something that Jeannie touched on earlier, and it is one of the biggest rubs in most organizations, right? You can get your executive team on board, you can get your product teams on board, but then the sales teams start to get their little fingers on the advisory board, and they think that, you know, hey, this is an opportunity for us to be able to do some stuff. So let's talk about how can you manage the demands from the sales team? And I don't know if anybody's got a strong, and we'll do like a 2-minute round on this one. I don't know if anybody's got a strong opinion or example they want to share of how they've done it in the past.
Well, I'll share that one of the things I've seen is sales teams trying to put a cab membership seat, a cab seat into a deal. And that's just no. So that's where the cab charter comes back in, right? Or I've got a deal that's closing, and or I've just closed a big deal, so that should give them a seat on the cab. No, so there's a cadence, there's a set of guidelines. The piece that I've been trying to do more is to at least let the sales team know a meeting's coming up, or your customer attended this most recent cab meeting, and to try to at least keep them in the loop at that level.
That's great. Heather?
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to add here. We don't have a huge issue. One thing I would just say that we do, it might be helpful for people, is we do take nominations from the field because they know their customers. We set the guidelines of what is a good member, what a member should be, but our VP of sales gets final approval. He looks at the list because he knows the mix and the priority level of that company as well as that person better than any of us do.
Perfect. Yeah, and what about you, Yvette, at Riverbed?
Yeah, when I was at Riverbed, the salespeople all wanted to come to the cabs and the tech they wanted to be there because their customers are there, which I don't blame them at all. Right? They've worked their whole life is making these relationships important and successful. We basically had the chief revenue officer, the chief sales officer come and said, okay, this person's representing all of sales. That's it. There's no other salespeople allowed in the door. You can come and you can take, attend the dinners in the evening, because I know that relationship building is really important and whatnot, but you can't really attend the meeting. I like 99% of the time won that battle, and there were no salespeople in the room. There was, one very special customer who was really had an embedded almost team that we did let the salesperson hang out in the back of the room, which I think was great for the account, but made my life harder down the road because other people were like, I heard that this one person came in, but if you invite all the salespeople and you have all the product managers and the product marketing people and the marketing people and the customer success support, suddenly, like Janine was saying, you can't have that many people in the room. We try to keep it at one-to-one ratio. If there's one customer, one Riverbed person. There's also, a lot of demand from sales from adding their customers. So there's a lot of kind of science in the back end, right? Making sure that you have the right verticals, the right alignment across titles, the right geos represented, and you have to use those rules like you have up on the slide to make sure that you've got a cross representation of the right customers. So sales will have a lot of nominations where they feel really strongly about it, but you have to make sure that you sort of meet your commitment to the organization without over rotating towards a vertical, a title, or a geo, so that you're getting the right feedback across your customer base back to the organization. If you over rotate, we found that like the feedback wasn't true to the whole customer base. But it's a constant. You should be very vigilant with that one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree 100%. I mean, the vigilance is really important. And I think another point on here that's really key as well is having that executive sponsor who's an ally and can be the tiebreaker, right? So that you're not having to be the bad guy in some of this stuff. Because at the end of the day, your responsibility is to run the advisory board the best way possible, both for the benefit of the organization and, as importantly, you're an advocate for the customer. So, sales number one job is they've got a quota to hit, right? That they want to go out and do that the best way that they can. And I think the way that you can show it is a last bullet on the slide here is being able to show how the advisory board has maybe helped with cross-sell and upsell directly, or how you've been able to mobilize customers on the back end to help support demand, getting better qualified leads, accelerating deals, and that kind of stuff. And I think that's kind of got to be the value that's communicated to customers. So
I'd also say with that, David, too, you know, the data piece is really important. For me, I lean heavily on our data scientists. We have 2 of them at CloudBees, and they are magic. What we found is, you know, very simply, our CAB members, those accounts, spend more and stay longer with us. And when you can point to those metrics and lean on folks who can slice and dice that data for you, it's really powerful.
perfect. Thank you to all, to obviously Jeannie and Heather and Yvette. Jeff, I think we just about snuck under the wire for time management purposes. As you can tell, we're very passionate about the topic of advisory boards. I see there's some questions. I don't know if we've got any more time for questions right now, Jeff.
If you want to take a few more, go right ahead. Our next session starts at 2:20 Eastern. So you're not eating into anybody else's time if you want to tackle a few more.
Okay, so if any of the audience has any questions that they want to ask the panelists, feel free to fire away.
Jeff, for those sample charters, where would be best to post those for people to have access to them? In the Slack channel, or?
Yeah, we should put them in the Slack channel, and then the other thing I can do, that could be the home, but I can also link to them from this session description on the event page, because that's where people are going to go for the recordings. And then there were also a few people that asked for the slides. So you obviously had some magic in there. So if you guys are all okay with sharing your slide deck, we'll link to it from there as well.
Yeah, let me just correct that one bullet, Jeff, and in there from slide 4 or 5, that was
okay.
obvious. So I'll do that and I'll share it with Dana.
Okay. And again, I wanted to see, not sure if you guys did address this question, but there was one earlier on about, or a couple questions related to one versus multiple or tiered cabs. I mean, is there like a big brand strategic executive one, and then a mid-level manager one, and then a power user one? Or like, look, what do you guys have either for advice or experience as it relates to perhaps the proliferation of cabs, whether it's a good thing or not?
I think it depends on what feedback you want to get.
Ahead.
Oh, sorry. We all have ideas.
No, go ahead, Yvette. Go ahead.
I think it depends on what kind of feedback you wanted to get back. What we found was that a lot of the C-suite wanted C-level feedback, and a lot of the product managers wanted a little more feeds, technical feedback. So we had to break our cab out depending on title, so that the right feedback was getting to the right people. And that sort of was the catalyst for change.
The only thing and Yvette and Jeannie, you can both weigh on this. The other thing that I would caution folks in the audience to be careful with, though, right, is that cabs can be like a drug, and that organizations are successful, they want to do more and more and more, right? But the one thing that's not scalable is you as a person. So I know, Yvette, you ran many cabs, but that was a huge time commitment. So it really comes down to, is the advisory board work the key priority for the customer marketer in the organization? Is the organization okay with potentially having the vast majority of time really dedicated towards that? Or is it an expectation that you're just going to work 75 hours a week to get stuff done?
Or will they give you other people? Like, we ended up empowering people in the region, building a kit to have them, work directly.
Yeah. And Jeannie, I know you're running 4, right? So what are you doing?
So this has been a challenge. We have a huge focus on the developer audience. We don't have a developer community today. There's some conversation about, should there be, a tangential cab that's specific to developers. What I'd like to see is have an umbrella cab organization that can then serve multiple purposes, but that the whole group can come together as well for various topics, so we don't have to do things twice. If there's certain things we want to communicate to all cab members, we can do that collectively, but then achieve multiple goals through those titles or those segments.
Perfect. And Yvette, I'm sorry, Heather, I believe you've only got one advice board right now. Is that right?
We do. It's the same for, and it's for execs, but it's the same one across each geo. So there's 3, but they operate pretty similarly. But we're considering a more technically oriented one, but not sure if we'll go there yet. So I agree with all of your comments.
Awesome.
And do any of you have an industry advisory board as well that has more industry luminaries or influencers? No? So that's
You
the...
did, David, didn't you? Didn't you have a financial services one?
Oh yeah, ours was just focused on financial services. Yes, correct. That wasn't horizontal. I thought Jeff was saying like literally like external folks or industry luminaries be part of the board. We didn't do that, but yes, ours was financial services only. And primarily that was because when we looked at the revenue that was being driven by our largest customers, like 8 out of the top 20 of our accounts were in financial services, and they also tended to be, in terms of information management, the most advanced or sophisticated, most mature programs out there as well. So that was the driver for it being a vertically focused CAB. You know, thanks again, Jeff, for the opportunity. This was really great to be able to share with everyone, and obviously Heather, Vet, and Jeannie as well. Thank you to you all for kind of sharing your wisdom and insights.